The proposition. The night Thea Ashford confronted a vampire king at his own charity gala, she wore borrowed heels and carried a printout of his shell company's wire transfers in her clutch. She had not planned to be reckless. The plan had been simple. Accept the anonymous funding that had appeared in her university lab's account 3 months prior, finish cataloging the dawn data for the climate archive, and never ask questions about money that kept the lights on and her research team employed. But then the invitation had arrived, cream-colored cardstock with gilt edges, requesting her presence at the Kael Foundation's annual benefit, and Thea had done what any scientist with more curiosity than sense would do. She had traced the foundation back through 4 layers of corporate structure until she found a name that appeared in city records dating back 200 years, always attached to property transfers that occurred at night, always witnessed by lawyers who later vanished from public record. Lucien Kael was either a vampire or the world's most committed eccentric, and Thea had built her entire academic career on the principle that improbable hypotheses deserved testing. The gala occupied 3 floors of a downtown glass tower that Kael Industries owned outright. Thea stood near the champagne fountain on the 20th floor, watching her benefactor hold court near the windows. He was exactly as the society photographs had shown him, tall and lean, with paper-white skin and hair the color of fresh snow that fell past his shoulders in a straight, severe line. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her yearly stipend, and he moved through the crowd with the kind of economy that made every gesture seem deliberate, planned 6 moves ahead. People deferred to him without realizing they were doing it, shifting their bodies to create pathways, lowering their voices when he came near. Thea downed her champagne in 3 swallows and headed straight for him. She was aware, distantly, that she was probably about to destroy her funding and possibly her career, but the scientific method demanded experimentation. And besides, she had perhaps 18 months before the degenerative retinal disease currently eating away at her optic nerves rendered her completely blind. If she was going to make catastrophically bad decisions, now was the time. "Mr. Kael," she said, loud enough that the circle of financiers and city officials around him paused mid-conversation. "Thea Ashford, you're funding my Dawn Archive project." He turned to face her with the kind of fluid precision that made her think of apex predators, all controlled power beneath a veneer of civilized restraint. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her reconsider every choice that had led to this moment. "Dr. Ashford," he said, and his voice was like cold water, clear and startling. "I was told you preferred to maintain your anonymity." "I did," Thea agreed, "until I realized my benefactor has been buying property in this city since 1823 and apparently doesn't age. So now I'm curious." The officials around them had gone very still. One woman, a city councilor Thea vaguely recognized, made a small noise that might have been a warning or simply dismay at watching a career implode in real time. Lucien Kael regarded her for a long moment, and Thea had the distinct impression she was being assessed, weighed, measured against some internal standard she couldn't begin to guess. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a slight softening around his eyes that felt like winter sun through clouds. "Perhaps we should speak privately," he said. "Perhaps you should stop hiding in the dark and come see what I'm actually studying," Thea countered, because apparently her mouth had decided that self-preservation was optional. "The observatory, tomorrow night, unless you're afraid of heights or light." She had not expected him to laugh, but he did, a brief exhale that sounded rusty, like a mechanism long unused. "I'm not afraid of heights, Dr. Ashford." "What about light?" His smile, when it came, was a razor's edge. "That," he said softly, "is a more complicated question." He came to the observatory the next night at 10 o'clock precisely, arriving without fanfare or security detail, just a tall figure in a dark coat materializing from the elevator as if he had always been there. Thea was alone, her 2 graduate assistants having left an hour earlier, and she was bent over her laptop reviewing the dawn spectrometry data when she sensed rather than heard him approach. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Sunrise isn't for another 8 hours." "I'm aware." He moved to stand beside her desk, and she noticed he kept a careful distance as if proximity required permission. You study the dawn. I catalog it, Thea corrected, finally glancing up at him. He looked even more striking in the observatory's dim red lighting, all sharp angles and predatory grace. Spectral data, atmospheric composition, light intensity across wavelengths. We're building a 50-year archive to track climate change impacts on morning light quality. It's boring work mostly, except for the part where I get to watch the sun come up every day. Something flickered across his face, too fast to name. And you invited me here to mock my inability to do the same. I invited you here, Thea said, standing so she could meet his eyes more easily, though he still had nearly a foot of height on her. Because you're spending a fortune to fund research you can never actually witness, and I wanted to understand why. Perhaps I appreciate the scientific method. Perhaps you're lonely, Thea said, and watched him go very still. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Outside the observatory's glass walls, the city sprawled in a glittering grid, 10 million lives burning bright against the dark. And Thea thought about all the ways loneliness could look like power, how isolation could masquerade as choice. I have been alive for 8 centuries, Lucien said finally, each word measured and precise. I have built empires and watched them crumble. I have sat in council chambers with creatures older than your recorded history. I am not lonely, Dr. Ashford. I am simply alone. That, Thea said gently, is the same thing. He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing, assessing and absolute. You are either very brave or very foolish. I'm dying, Thea said, because apparently tonight was for truth she usually kept locked away. Retinal degeneration, genetic, progressive, no cure. I have maybe a year and a half before I can't see the dawn anymore, which means I have 18 months to be as brave and foolish as possible. So yes, I called you out at your own gala, and yes, I'm standing here telling the Vampire King that he's lonely, because what exactly do I have to lose? The words hung in the air between them, and Thea watched Lucien's expression shift through several emotions too quickly to parse. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its cold precision, dropping into something lower and almost warm. Vampire King, he repeated, you are certain of that assessment. You don't age, you avoid daylight, you have records going back centuries, and you move like something that stopped being entirely human a very long time ago, Thea said. Also, your eyes reflect light like a cat's, which I noticed in the gala photographs. So yes, I'm certain, and if I'm wrong, you can laugh at the crazy astronomer and withdraw your funding, but somehow I don't think I'm wrong. Lucien studied her for another long moment, and then he did something that surprised her completely. He smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed his entire face from beautiful but cold into something devastating and genuine. No, he said, you are not wrong, and I will not withdraw the funding. He moved past her to the windows, gazing out at the city with an expression she couldn't quite read. You said you watch the sunrise every day. Every day I'm able, Thea confirmed. It's part of the data collection, but also, she trailed off, unsure how to explain the private ritual of it, the way she needed to see the light return each morning as proof that the darkness was temporary, survivable. Also, Lucien prompted, still looking at the city. Also, I love it, Thea admitted. The moment when the sky starts to lighten, right before the sun breaks the horizon. That particular quality of blue that only exists for about 3 minutes, the way the whole world holds its breath. I remember, Lucien said quietly. It has been 793 years since I watched the dawn, but I remember. Something in his voice made Thea's chest ache. She moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough now that she could feel the strange coolness that radiated from him, like standing near deep water. Is it true, she asked, about the sun? That it would burn me to ash? Lucien's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite humor. Yes, sunlight and fire are the only things that can truly kill my kind. We are creatures of the night by necessity, not choice. That seems unfair, Thea said, to be immortal but never see the dawn again. Immortality, Lucien said, is built entirely on unfair trades. They stood together in silence, watching the city lights blur and shift. Thea was intensely aware of him beside her, the careful way he held himself, the sense of vast time and experience compressed into his stillness. She thought about what it would mean to live for 8 centuries, to watch everyone you knew grow old and die while you remained frozen, to lose even the memory of sunlight to the slow erosion of years. "Come back tomorrow night," she said impulsively. "And the night after. I can't show you the actual dawn, but I can show you the data, the measurements, the way the light builds. I can describe it for you." Lucien turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, something raw beneath the ancient power. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're funding my work, and I'm grateful," Thea said. "And because you're lonely, even if you won't admit it. And because maybe I'm lonely too, and watching the dawn alone is getting old." "You barely know me," Lucien said. "I am a predator, Dr. Ashford. I have killed more people than you could count. I'm not safe." "I'm not asking you to be safe," Thea said. "I'm asking you to come watch data collection with me, unless you're afraid." That earned her another of those rusty laughs. "You enjoy baiting me." "I enjoy honesty," Thea corrected. "And you haven't actually answered the question." Lucien regarded her for a long moment, and then he inclined his head in a gesture that managed to be both courtly and utterly natural. "Very well, Dr. Ashford. I will return tomorrow night if you are certain." "I'm certain," Thea said, and felt something shift in her chest, a door opening onto possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in months. He left before midnight, vanishing into the elevator with the same silent grace he'd arrived with, and Thea stood alone in the observatory watching the city breathe and wondering what exactly she had just started. The answer came the next night when Lucien returned carrying 2 cups of coffee, one prepared exactly the way Thea liked it, though she had never told him her order. He set it on her desk without comment, then settled into the chair across from her workstation as if he belonged there. "How did you know?" Thea asked, picking up the cup and inhaling the perfect ratio of cream to sugar. "I pay attention," Lucien said simply, and Thea felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. They fell into a pattern. Every night for 3 weeks, Lucien arrived at the observatory between 10 and 11, and every night he stayed until 4 in the morning, when the sky began its subtle shift toward dawn and he had to leave. They talked about her research, about the intricate dance of light and atmosphere, about the ways climate change was altering the spectrum of morning in ways too subtle for human eyes, but stark in the data. Lucien asked questions with the precision of someone who had spent centuries learning to learn, and Thea found herself explaining her work with an enthusiasm she usually reserved for conference presentations. But they talked about other things too. Lucien told her about the city's history, about buildings that no longer existed and streets that had changed names a dozen times. He told her about the court he ruled, the vampire hierarchy that existed in the spaces between human awareness, ancient and complex and governed by laws older than countries. He described the other elders with a wry distance that made Thea suspect politics were the same whether conducted in boardrooms or immortal courts. Thea told him about her childhood in rural Montana, about parents who had encouraged her obsession with the sky, about the moment she'd looked through her first telescope and felt the universe expand around her. She told him about the diagnosis 2 years ago, about the slow betrayal of her own body, about the fear that lived under her skin like a second pulse. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said one night, surprising herself with the admission. "I'm afraid of the dark, of not being able to see the stars anymore, of losing the one thing that made sense to me." Lucien had been standing at the window, but he turned at that, moving with his characteristic fluid economy until he was close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "You are the bravest person I have met in 800 years, he said quietly. "I'm terrified constantly," Thea countered. "Yes," Lucien agreed. "That is what makes you brave." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear with fingers that were cool but impossibly gentle. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Thea felt it down to her bones. She fell first, she realized later. Somewhere in those late-night conversations, in the way he brought her coffee and listened to her talk about light, in the careful way he never touched her without warning, as if her consent was precious and her space sacred. She fell for the vampire king the way dawn came to the sky. Gradually, inevitably, and then all at once in a rush of color that took her breath away. The problem was that Lucien had a court to manage, laws to uphold, and a rival lord who was very interested in the human astronomer, spending every night with the king. Thea first learned about Valerian Corvus on a Tuesday night when Lucien arrived 20 minutes late, a delay so uncharacteristic that she'd started to worry. He looked unruffled as always, but there was tension in his shoulders that she'd learned to recognize. "Court business?" she asked, handing him the coffee she'd made when he was 5 minutes late. "Valerian," Lucien said, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks, "he's decided your existence is a provocation." "My existence?" Thea repeated slowly. "Or my relationship with you?" "We do not have a relationship," Lucien said, but his voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. "Fine," Thea said. "My nightly coffee dates with you. Is that better?" "It is not safer," Lucien said. He set down his coffee and moved to stand before her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Valerian is old and cunning, and he views you as leverage. He will use you against me if given the opportunity." "So don't give him the opportunity," Thea said. "Or better yet, explain to him that I'm not a weapon to be wielded." "You do not understand vampire politics," Lucien said. There was frustration in his voice now, bleeding through his usual control. "You are human, fragile, and you have caught the attention of a king. That makes you valuable and vulnerable in equal measure. Valerian knows this." "Then teach me," Thea said. "Explain the politics. Help me understand what I'm actually dealing with." Lucien looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him make some internal calculation. Finally, he sighed, a peculiarly human gesture that made her ache. There are laws," he said. "Old laws that govern our kind. One of them is the Sun Law. No vampire of royal blood may gamble the bloodline on daylight folly. It exists to prevent kings and queens from destroying themselves in moments of weakness or madness." "And coming here every night counts as gambling?" Thea asked. "Not yet," Lucien said. "But Valerian is arguing that my attachment to you represents a dangerous instability. He's calling for a formal inquiry, which is court language for a trial." Thea felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What happens at a trial?" "They examine my judgment, question my fitness to rule, and possibly vote to restrict my movements," Lucien said flatly. "It is political theater designed to weaken my position. But the threat is real, Thea. If Valerian can prove that you represent a genuine risk to my stability, if he can demonstrate that I might, for example, attempt something catastrophically foolish to please you, he can have you removed as a threat." "Removed," Thea repeated. "As in killed." "Yes." The word hung between them like a blade. Thea sat down slowly, processing this information. She had known, academically, that Lucien was dangerous, that his world operated by rules she didn't understand. But knowing and understanding were different things, and right now she was understanding that she had wandered into a game where the stakes were measured in lives. "So stop coming here," she said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "If I'm the problem, remove me from the equation." Lucien moved so fast she didn't see it happen. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, the next he was kneeling before her chair, his hands on the armrests, caging her in without touching her. "No," he said, and his voice was absolutely unyielding. "Valerian does not dictate my choices. No one does." "Even if it costs you your position?" Thea asked. "Even if it puts us both in danger?" "Even then," Lucien said. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his cool palm. "I have been alive for 8 centuries, Thea. I've been powerful and feared, and utterly alone for so long I forgot what it felt like to want something beyond survival. You reminded me. You, with your borrowed shoes and your reckless questions and your love of the dawn. I am not giving that up because Valerian is threatened by it." Thea leaned into his touch, feeling the impossible coolness of his skin against her cheek. "What if I'm not worth the fight?" "You are worth every fight," Lucien said fiercely, "and anyone who suggests otherwise will learn exactly why I'm king." He kissed her then, gentle and careful and absolutely devastating, and Thea felt the world tilt on its axis. His mouth was cool and soft, and he tasted faintly of something she couldn't name, something old and wild and not quite human. She tangled her fingers in his hair and kissed him back with all the desperation of someone running out of time. And when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "This is a terrible idea," Thea whispered against his mouth. "The worst," Lucien agreed, and kissed her again. They navigated the next 3 weeks in a heightened state of awareness, knowing that Valerian was watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Lucien assigned guards to Thea's apartment building in the university, vampire soldiers who dressed like private security and never spoke, but radiated an aura of controlled menace that made Thea's neighbors nervous. He came to the observatory every night without fail, and they fell into a new pattern that included less talking and more touching, careful explorations that left Thea burning and wanting more. But there were limits. Lucien was careful never to take things too far, never to let his control slip entirely, and Thea understood that he was protecting her from himself as much as from Valerian. She didn't push, because she could see the strain in him, the way he held himself on a knife's edge between desire and restraint. On the 43rd night, Thea told him about the diagnosis update. She had been to the specialist that afternoon, the ophthalmologist who had been tracking her degeneration for 2 years. The news had been delivered with clinical precision. Her vision was deteriorating faster than predicted. She had perhaps 8 months left, maybe less, before the world went dark entirely. Lucien listened without interrupting, his face carved from marble, and when she finished he pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that made her throat close. "I want to see one more sunrise," Thea said into his chest, "before it's gone. A real one, not just data. I want to watch the dawn one last time while I still can." She felt him go still. "Thea, I know it's impossible," she said quickly. "I know you can't be there. I'm not asking you to burn for me. I just need to say it out loud, that's all. I need to grieve for it." Lucien pulled back, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. There was something burning in them, some emotion too fierce to name. "What if it were not impossible?" "What? What if I could give you that sunrise?" Lucien said slowly, and Thea could practically see him thinking, calculating, weighing risks against desires. What if there were a way? "You said sunlight would kill you," Thea said. "The sun law exists specifically to prevent this kind of thing." "The sun law," Lucien said, "was written to prevent kings from destroying themselves for foolish reasons. Love is not foolish, Thea, and there are old magics, blood magics, that can protect against sunlight for brief periods. Dangerous, unpredictable, but possible." "No," Thea said immediately. "Absolutely not. I'm not watching you burn to ash just so I can see a sunrise. That's insane." "Is it?" Lucien asked. "You dared me once before, Thea. You dared me to prove I wasn't afraid of light. Let me prove it." "That was before I loved you," Thea said, and then stopped, because apparently her brain-to-mouth filter had completely abandoned her. The silence that followed was absolute. Lucien stared at her, something like wonder dawning in his ancient eyes. "Say that again," he said softly. "I love you," Thea repeated, because there was no point in taking it back now. "Which is why I'm not letting you commit suicide by sunrise. Find another way to prove your feelings, preferably one that doesn't involve you turning into a pile of ash." Lucien laughed, the sound bright and genuine, and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like joy and desperation in equal measure. When he pulled back, he was shaking his head. "You love me," he repeated, like he was testing the words. "Apparently my survival instincts are as bad as my career instincts," Thea said. "But yes, I love you. Is that going to be a problem?" "No," Lucien said, and kissed her again. "It is going to be a complication, but not a problem. Never a problem." "So you'll stop talking about suicidal sunrise watching?" Thea pressed. "I will think about it," Lucien said, which was not remotely the same thing as agreement, and Thea felt worry coil in her gut. She should have pushed harder, should have made him promise, extracted some kind of vow. But she was too busy kissing him, too lost in the feeling of being held by someone who looked at her like she was the dawn itself. And she let it go. 3 days later, Valerian made his move. Thea was alone in the observatory when he arrived, her graduate assistants having left early for a conference. She was reviewing spectrometry data when she felt the temperature drop, a sudden chill that made her breath fog in the air. She looked up to find a man standing in the doorway, and even without introduction she knew who he was. Valerian Corvus was shorter than Lucien, broader through the shoulders, with the same paper-white skin and hair the color of old snow. But where Lucien moved with economy and precision, Valerian radiated barely controlled aggression, a sense of violence held in check by will alone. He wore a modern suit, but somehow made it look like armor. Dr. Ashford, he said, and his voice was gravel and smoke. I thought it was time we met. Lucien's guards are downstairs, Thea said, proud that her voice stayed steady. They'll be here in seconds if I call. I know, Valerian said, moving into the room with predatory grace. I am not here to harm you, Doctor. I am here to explain reality. I'm familiar with reality, Thea said, and I'm fairly certain my version is more accurate than yours. That earned her a cold smile. Brave words for someone so very fragile. Tell me, do you know what happens when a vampire king loses his judgment? When he becomes unstable, unpredictable, willing to violate our most sacred laws? I imagine you tell me he needs to be replaced, Thea said. This is the part where you threaten me to drive a wedge between us, right? Very original. This is the part where I explain that Lucien is planning to violate the sun law, Valerian said, and Thea's blood turned to ice. He intends to use blood magic to watch the sunrise with you, an act that will either kill him outright or destroy him in ways that make death preferable. And when that happens, the court will have no choice but to eliminate the cause of his instability. Meaning me, Thea said. Meaning you, Valerian agreed. But there is another option. You could simply disappear. Leave the city, end this relationship, let Lucien remember why he is king and not a lovesick fool. Do that, and I guarantee your safety. Refuse, and I will ensure that your presence becomes impossible to ignore. You're threatening to expose me to hunters, Thea said, piecing it together. Force Lucien to choose between protecting me and maintaining his position. I am offering you a chance to save yourself and possibly save him, Valerian corrected. Love is a weakness, Dr. Ashford, and weaknesses in kings become everyone's problem. He left as silently as he'd arrived, and Thea stood alone in the observatory feeling like the walls were closing in. She pulled out her phone to call Lucien, then hesitated. If she told him about Valerian's visit, he would do something rash and kingly and probably violent. If she didn't tell him, she was keeping secrets, and secrets would poison what they had faster than any threat. In the end, she called him. He arrived 12 minutes later with 6 guards and an expression that would have sent armies running. Thea explained Valerian's visit in clinical detail, leaving nothing out, and watched Lucien's face shift from rage to calculation and back again. He threatened you, Lucien said, very quietly, and Thea knew that tone. It was the voice of a king who had just decided someone needed to cease existing. He offered me an out, Thea corrected, and he told me you're planning something suicidal with blood magic and the sunrise, which you conveniently forgot to mention in detail. Lucien had the grace to look slightly guilty. I was researching possibilities. You were planning to burn for me, Thea said. Don't bother denying it. I was planning, Lucien said carefully, to find a way to give you what you needed. The method was still under consideration. The method that involves old blood magic that might kill you or destroy you in ways worse than death? Thea asked. That method? There are risks, Lucien admitted. No, Thea said flatly. Absolutely not. I won't let you do this. It is not your choice, Lucien said, and there was steel in his voice now, the unyielding authority of 8 centuries of rule. You told me you wanted to see the sunrise. I am telling you I will make that happen. Not if it means losing you, Thea said, and felt tears burn in her eyes. I can't watch you die for me, Lucien. I won't. They stared at each other, deadlocked, and Thea felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them. Stay together and risk everything, or separate and lose the one thing that had made either of them feel alive in years. There may be another option, Lucien said finally, but you will not like it. Try me, Thea said. I could turn you, Lucien said quietly. Make you vampire. You would heal completely, including your eyes. You would be immortal, safe from Valerian's threats, and bound to me in ways the court could not challenge. We would never see the dawn again, but we would have eternity together. Thea felt the words hit like a physical blow. She had known academically that turning was possible, but she had never seriously considered it as an option. To give up sunlight forever, to become a creature of the night, to leave behind everything she had been and everyone she knew. That's not a solution, she said slowly. That's you asking me to give up the thing I love most because you're too stubborn to let me go. Yes, Lucien said. That is exactly what I'm asking. Because I am selfish, and I have been alone for 800 years, and I will not lose you if there is any other option. Even if it means I never see the sunrise again, Thea asked. Even if it means I become something I'm not? You would be yourself, Lucien said fiercely. You would be Thea, brilliant and brave and reckless. You would simply be those things forever. Thea turned away, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the dawn, about that particular blue that only existed for 3 minutes each morning. She thought about dying blind and alone versus living forever in the dark. She thought about love and sacrifice and the impossibility of choosing between the two. I need time, she said finally. I can't decide this right now. Time is what we do not have, Lucien said. Valerian will move against us soon, and when he does, there will be no more options. Then we make time, Thea said, turning back to face him. We figure out how to deal with Valerian, and then I'll decide about turning. But I need to see the sunrise one more time first, Lucien, even if it's alone. I need that closure. Something shifted in Lucien's expression, a calculation falling into place. What if you did not have to see it alone? We've been over this, Thea said. You can't. The blood magic is possible, Lucien interrupted. Dangerous, but possible. And if I am going to risk it regardless, better to risk it for something that matters. You are the most infuriatingly stubborn person I have ever met, Thea said, but her resistance was crumbling. Because God help her, she wanted this, wanted to share one dawn with him before making the choice about forever. I am a king, Lucien said, pulling her close. Stubbornness is a requirement. Say yes, Thea, let me give you this. If you die, Thea said against his chest, I will never forgive you. If I die, Lucien said, I will not be around to care about your forgiveness. But I will not die, Thea. I am very difficult to kill. Promise me, Thea said. I promise, Lucien said, and kissed her like he was memorizing the taste of her mouth. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Lucien spent long hours with ancient texts, consulting with the oldest vampires in his court about blood magics that had not been used in centuries. He explained the process to Thea with clinical precision. He would need to drink the blood of 3 ancient vampires, absorbing their combined power, and then mark himself with sigils that would channel that power into a temporary shield against sunlight. The magic would last perhaps 30 minutes, maybe an hour if they were lucky, and the cost would be substantial. Weeks of recovery, possibly permanent damage to his ability to tolerate even moonlight. And if it goes wrong? Thea asked. Then I burn, Lucien said simply, but it will not go wrong. He said it with such absolute certainty that Thea almost believed him. The night before the sunrise, Lucien came to her apartment instead of the observatory. He had never been there before, and Thea felt oddly nervous watching him take in her space, the cluttered bookshelves and telescope by the window and photographs of Montana skies tacked to the walls. It suits you, he said finally, and pulled her into his arms. They made love slowly, carefully, and Thea felt like she was memorizing him, cataloging every touch and sound the way she cataloged dawn data. His skin was cool beneath her hands, and he moved with that characteristic precision, but there was tenderness in the way he held her, like she was something precious and breakable. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her bed, and Lucien told her stories about the world before electric lights, about stars so bright they cast shadows in skies so clear you could see the dust of galaxies. Thea listened and tried not to think about the morning, about the risk he was taking, about the choice she would have to make after. I've decided, she said quietly, when the sky outside had started its subtle shift toward pre-dawn gray. Lucien went still beside her. Yes? I want to turn, Thea said. Not out of fear, not because I'm dying. I want to turn because I want forever with you, because I love you enough to give up the dawn if it means we get to be together. But I need to see it one last time first. I need that closure. She felt him exhale, a shuddering breath that moved through his whole body. You are certain? I'm certain, Thea said, and meant it. I'm terrified, and it's insane, and I'm certain. But only if you survive this morning. If you don't, I'm staying human and spending the rest of my life cursing your name. Deal, Lucien said, and kissed her with something like desperation. They drove to a location Lucien had scouted carefully, a cliff overlooking the ocean 3 hours north of the city, far from populated areas and vampire politics both. The eastern sky was still dark when they arrived, but Thea could feel the promise of dawn in the air, that particular quality of anticipation that came before sunrise. Lucien set up what looked like a meditation space near the cliff edge, cushions for them to sit on, a clear view of the horizon, and nothing else. He had marked his skin with sigils that glowed faintly in the pre-dawn dark, ancient symbols that hurt to look at directly. He looked otherworldly and terrifying and heartbreakingly beautiful. "The magic is active," he said, and his voice was strained. "I can feel it working, but it is uncomfortable." "We can stop," Thea said immediately. "We can leave right now." "No," Lucien said. "I promised you a sunrise." They sat together on the cushions, and Lucien pulled her back against his chest so they could watch the horizon together. Thea felt the coolness of him against her back, the way his arms wrapped around her waist, protective and possessive in equal measure. The sky began to lighten slowly, incrementally, the way it always did. Black to charcoal, to slate, to that particular shade of blue that Thea loved most, the color that existed only in the space between night and day. She felt Lucien tense behind her, his arms tightening almost imperceptibly. "Talk to me," she said softly. "Tell me what you're feeling." "Heat," Lucien said, and his voice was tight with pain. "Like standing too close to a fire. The magic is holding, but it costs." "We can stop," Thea said again, but Lucien shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "Keep watching, Thea. Tell me what you see." So she did. She described the way the blue deepened and spread, the first touches of gold and pink at the horizon line, the way the clouds caught fire with reflected light. She talked through the entire process, narrating the dawn like she used to narrate data collection, and behind her she felt Lucien breathing hard, struggling against pain she could only imagine. When the sun finally broke the horizon, a sliver of gold spilling light across the water, Thea heard Lucien make a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Beautiful," he whispered. "I had forgotten how beautiful." Thea turned in his arms, needing to see his face. He looked wrecked, tears tracking down his cheeks, but he was smiling with something like wonder. The sunlight touched his skin, and the sigils flared bright, channeling the light away, and Thea watched the magic work with her scientist's eye, even as her heart broke at the cost. "Enough?" she asked gently. "Not yet," Lucien said. "A few more minutes. Please." So they sat together and watched the sun rise fully above the horizon, watched the world wake up in shades of gold and amber, and Thea felt something settle in her chest. This was enough. This moment, this shared experience, this proof that love could survive impossible odds and ancient laws and the weight of centuries. When Lucien finally said they needed to leave, his voice was barely a whisper, and Thea could see the toll the magic had taken. They made it back to the car just as the sigils began to fail, and she drove them back to the city, while Lucien sat in the passenger seat trembling with exhaustion and pain. "Worth it," he said when they were halfway home, and Thea reached over to take his hand. "Worth it," she agreed. The turning happened a week later, after Lucien had recovered enough to perform the ritual properly. He explained the process with the same clinical precision he'd used for the blood magic. She would need to drink his blood, die, and wake up 3 days later as vampire. It would hurt. She would be different, but she would be alive and whole and his. Thea signed paperwork with her university, arranging for her graduate assistants to take over the Dawn Archive project. She said goodbye to her parents over a video call, telling them she was moving abroad for a research opportunity and knowing it was a lie but unable to tell the truth. She packed up her apartment and moved her few precious belongings to Lucien's home, a sprawling penthouse that overlooked the city from glass walls. On the night of the turning, Valerian arrived with half the vampire court in tow, claiming he needed to witness the procedure to ensure it was done properly. Thea recognized it for what it was: a power play, a final attempt to demonstrate that Lucien's choices were subject to court oversight. Lucien looked at Valerian with an expression that could have cut glass. "You dare question my authority in this?" "I question your judgment," Valerian said. "You have violated the sun law, risked your life for a human, and now you intend to turn her. The court has a right to witness that you are stable enough to perform the ritual properly." "The court," Lucien said with lethal softness, does not dictate whom I turn or when, but if you require proof of my stability, you are welcome to challenge me directly, Valerian. I promise you will not enjoy the outcome. The threat hung in the air like a blade, and Thea watched Valerian calculate his odds. Whatever he saw in Lucien's face made him back down, though his expression suggested the retreat was temporary. No challenge, Valerian said finally, merely concern for our king's well-being. Your concern is noted and dismissed, Lucien said. Now leave my home before I decide to demonstrate exactly how stable I am. They left, but Thea could feel the weight of their attention even after they were gone. This was not over. Valerian would try again, find another angle to exploit, another weakness to press. But that was a problem for after the turning. The ritual itself was surprisingly simple. Lucien made a cut on his wrist and held it to her mouth, and Thea drank blood that tasted like copper and winter and something impossibly ancient. She felt it burn down her throat, felt her heart stutter and slow, felt the world start to gray at the edges. I love you, she managed to say, and then the darkness took her. She woke 3 days later in silk sheets, in a room with blackout curtains, with vision so sharp it hurt and a hunger that felt like dying. Lucien was there immediately, offering her a crystal glass filled with blood that was still warm, and she drank without thinking, instinct overriding squeamishness. When the hunger faded enough for her to think, she realized she could see perfectly. The degradation was gone, reversed, erased like it had never existed. She could count the threads in the curtains, see dust motes floating in the sliver of lamplight, read the spines of books on shelves 30 feet away. It worked, she whispered. It worked, Lucien confirmed, and pulled her into his arms. The first month was adjustment, learning to control the hunger, the strength, the predatory instincts that came with immortality. Learning to navigate vampire court politics as Lucien's consort, a position that came with power and danger in equal measure. Learning to grieve for the dawn even as she embraced the night. Valerian made one more attempt to challenge Lucien's rule, calling for a formal inquiry on grounds that the king's judgment had been compromised. But the inquiry went nowhere, because Thea had spent the month learning everything she could about vampire law, and she appeared before the court to argue her own case. You claim the king's judgment is compromised, she said, facing down Valerian and the assembled elders with a confidence she half-faked. But I see no evidence of that. He rules, as he always has, with strength and wisdom. The only thing that has changed is that he is no longer alone. If you truly believe that love makes a king unfit to rule, then perhaps you should examine why you have been alone for so long, Lord Valerian. The dig landed, and the court erupted in surprised laughter. Valerian looked like he'd swallowed glass, and Lucien watched from his throne with an expression that was pure pride. The inquiry was dismissed, and Valerian faded back into the shadows of court politics, still present, but no longer an immediate threat. Thea knew he would resurface eventually, because men like Valerian always did, but that was a problem for another day. 2 months after the turning, Lucien took Thea back to the observatory. It was night, would always be night now, but she could still collect data, still catalog the stars, still do the work she loved. Her graduate assistants had transitioned the Dawn archive to a new protocol, and Thea found she could be content with the stars alone, knowing that Dawn existed, even if she couldn't see it. Do you regret it? Lucien asked, watching her set up the spectrometer. No, Thea said, and meant it. I miss the sunrise sometimes, but I wouldn't trade this. I wouldn't trade us. Good, Lucien said, and kissed her with the casual intimacy of someone who knew they had forever to do it again. 1 year after the turning, the court gathered for a formal ceremony marking Thea's full acceptance as Lucien's consort and co-ruler. She wore white silk that made her new vampire pale skin luminous, and Lucien wore black with silver accents, and they stood together before the assembled elders and swore oaths in a language older than English. Valerian was there, watching with cold calculation, but he made no move to challenge them. Thea met his eyes across the throne room and saw the exact moment he accepted that she was here to stay, that she had beaten him at his own game. After the ceremony, Lucien pulled her onto the balcony overlooking the same city she had watched from the observatory all those months ago. I have been thinking, he said, about the future. That's a dangerous habit, Thea said, leaning into his embrace. The future is a very long time for us now. Yes, Lucien agreed, which is why I want to rewrite the Sun Law. Thea pulled back to look at him. You want to what? The Sun Law was written to prevent kings from destroying themselves, Lucien said. But I did not destroy myself. I survived, and I would do it again. The law needs to reflect that risk is not the same as folly, that love is not weakness, but strength. The court will fight you on that, Thea said. Let them fight, Lucien said. I am king, and you are my queen, and we have eternity to change minds and rewrite laws. Unless you object? I never object to rewriting bad laws, Thea said. That's basically my entire personality. Lucien laughed and kissed her, and Thea thought about the night she had called him out at his own gala, about borrowed shoes and reckless questions and dares that changed everything. She thought about the sunrise they had watched together, about the cost and the choice and the impossible math of love. She had dared the vampire king to feel the sunrise, and he had risked ashes to watch it with her. And now they had forever to make sure that kind of love was not just possible, but celebrated, that the laws that governed their world made room for connection and courage, and the kind of reckless joy that made even immortality bearable. 3 years later, the Sun Law was officially amended. 5 years later, Thea completed her doctorate in vampire astrophysics and opened a night observatory that became a haven for vampire scientists. 10 years later, she and Lucien stood together on a different cliff, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Thea realized she could not remember the exact shade of blue that existed right before dawn. But she remembered Lucien's arms around her, remembered the way he had trembled with pain to give her what she needed, remembered the moment she had chosen forever over sunlight, and never regretted it once. I love you, she said into the night air. I know, Lucien said, and pulled her closer. I have loved you since the moment you dared me at the gala. I will love you until the stars burn out. That's a very long time, Thea said. Yes, Lucien agreed, but we have excellent coffee and interesting work in each other. I think we will manage. Thea laughed and kissed him, and above them the stars blazed cold and eternal, bearing witness to a love that had survived impossible odds and would last just as long. They had given up the dawn, but gained eternity, and in the end, it was the best trade either of them had ever made.